Hi, I'm Chantal Botha. I'm the CEO of Brand Love, and I'm here to talk to you about culture. Culture has always been a topic that fascinated me. Through my 12 years of working as a customer experience professional, designing experiences for some of the biggest brands in South Africa, working on employee journeys, I've always come back to the fact that culture determines the quality of those experiences. And culture is often intangible. I spend time with a lot of brands, and very often when I walk the passageways in the big corporates, I look at the posters on the wall and I read the words, and some of the words are very inspirational and some of it has been wordsmithed just beautifully. And then I arrive in the boardroom and I look at the quality of the communication. I look at how people interact with each other. What are their manners? What are their rituals? What are their practices? What drives their decisions? And often I find a disconnect between the posters in the passageways and the behavior of the people around meeting rooms. And I've been fascinated to find out, what do some of the most admired brands do? How did they design their culture? How are they managing their culture? And, what is the role that every person plays in that culture? I don't believe that culture is made up of the posters and the beautiful lines on the website. I believe that culture happens when people come together and in environments where you might have had that feeling when you walk into a company and something feels off, something feels unsafe, and often the demands that an organization put on their people drive a lot of fear without it being spoken. And I think I want to unpack today for you the unspoken parts of the culture and really help you and empower you to find a bit of that reset button, the button that you'll press to start managing your culture and to deliberately design the culture you want and to create an environment that will attract the people that will help you achieve your purpose and your passion as a brand, and therefore will drive performance into the future. In February 2020, just before most of the world went into lockdown, I went on a quest to visit some of my most admired brands. And I got to spend some time with Zappos in Las Vegas, understanding a lot more about their culture and how they design their culture and how they practice the culture that are on posters on the wall every day. I also spent time with the Ritz-Carlton in Sarasota, and you might recall this amazing, I now have my own Ritz-Carlton Credo card. And I was really inspired by what I experienced in both of these brands. I was also inspired by the honesty and the genuineness that both of these brands expressed in terms of what they're struggling with. Often, we're looking for the faultless brand, the one that never makes mistakes, and that doesn't exist. I think what I've experienced certainly with both of these brands is that things go wrong. And very often, the things that go wrong that are not scripted really relies on the personal values of the people and the skills of the people to live the culture in that moment. And that was really my quest, is to see these brands in action and to learn more from them. And I'd really like to share my learnings with you in the rest of this presentation. I want to share a few of my thoughts with you around culture. Culture is, I had a mentor who said culture is a little bit like a mango that you've peeled. It's kind of hard to get a grip on culture. And I think culture in all of what I've seen is very much around the unspoken behaviors inside a company, It's also a combination of the mindset and some of the social patterns, some of the habits that have formed over years. The ingredients of culture for me is very much around what are the spoken values inside the company, what are the company's goals. And I understand that most companies operate because they want to be profitable, but profit alone can't just be your top goal. If you go back to what's the original purpose of the company, what is the problems that the company is trying to solve for customers and for employees, and refocus employees on what that purpose is. A lot of the time that goes a long way in just reframing where you're trying to go to. The third component of culture, or third ingredient of culture, I see very much around the ethics. So what are the ethics that's really important to this company? What are some of the behaviors inside of the company that you want to specifically encourage? And then I've added an element here around people conviction. Very often, you're trying to attract the right people for your organization's culture, but we haven't articulated what the right people are. What should their conviction be? What should their calling be so that they'll fit into your company culture? And then the sixth ingredient here is around practices and rituals. Like with any exercise, you need to practice in order to be able to run a marathon. If you want to be creative, you need to have a practice of painting or sculpturing in order to say that you practice art or that you are artistic. So these ingredients are really important for your company to articulate so that employees can understand this, that employees can contribute to putting this set of ingredients together for your company. So company culture can either be unmanaged, so we just let it haphazardly develop day to day. We might have some posters on the wall, but we don't have specific practices. We leave it up to each area to define what they do to contribute to the culture. And every 2 or 3 years, we have a campaign or an initiative where we dust off the culture. We leave a book on people's desks, or we have some balloons and some hamburgers or banners up, and we think that that's going to do something for the employees. Or we can have a deliberately managed culture where culture is seen as an asset, where culture is managed like any other asset inside your company is managed, where it's cultivated, where it's looked after, where there's check-ins that happen around your culture, not the surveys that come out once a year, but that there's continuous discussion, that every decision we make, we look at what is the impact of that decision on culture. So very often, when companies engage specifically with myself around culture, it's when the fires are raging, when they have a mass exodus of people, or where they see really low productivity, and then people want to start paying attention to culture. I think especially for the younger generation entering the marketplace, they have a big yearning to belong somewhere, and they want to belong to a company they want to belong in a group inside a company where they feel at home, where they feel that they're contributing, where they have a purpose. So I think it's becoming much, much more important to manage your company's culture. If we then look at the enemies of culture, in my experience, I've seen that fear inside companies and companies where there isn't a lot of psychological safety tends to erode the culture, and people aren't really even open to those discussions. Then another enemy of culture is really habits that are formed over the years that are no longer serving the company. The manner in which people engage with each other, the kind of humor, the kind of language they use. And then often dishonesty. Dishonesty is a big enemy to the culture, and dishonesty leads to lack of transparency, leads to information not being shared widely, and that creates a lot of mistrust, which again fuels fear. So you can see, these enemies, they kind of hang out together, and they make it really difficult for companies to maintain the ideal culture. If we then look at the friends of culture, that's very much around having a vision and a purpose, around building trust inside the organization, and very much around cooperation and teamwork. We have survived as humans because we cooperate, and because we work together, and because we function in tribes, and because we create safety in tribes. What's interesting about the corporate world is that most of the time when I go into an organization, there's a lot of unsafety, there's a lot of mistrust, and really people don't want to be in those tribes. And you see a lot of the effects of that is that people, are mentally not healthy. There's a lot of depression, there's a lot of kind of bad things around substance abuse that happen because people are so miserable in their workplaces. And really, as leaders, this is our call to create workplaces where people can live their purpose, and where they can practice their passion, and where they feel they're part of a meaningful contribution. So let's look at the clues that I look for when I go into a corporate and they've asked me to help them with their culture. So I look at, communication in general. What's the frequency of communication? What's the quality of communication? What's the content of that communication? What are the manners? How do people show up? What are their typical habits and manners? Are emotions welcome inside the company? So, I'm not saying let's all be kumbaya, my lord, and, dance around trees, but environments where there's an expectation that, you'll leave the messiness outside and be very professional inside the company. Often, emotions are shoved down, and that creates a breeding place for just unhealthy behavior and non-genuine behavior. We also look at whether colleagues socialize with each other. And then what's the leadership style? What's the leadership practices, leadership principles? How do people lead in these organizations? Now, I believe culture needs to be designed, and there's a lot to be said for co-design with employees if you're trying to revitalize your culture. But fundamentally, I think culture needs to be underpinned by skills, and skills around communication. It needs to introduce empathy as a skill, because we can learn how to be more empathetic. I think, we get born very caring, and we have natural empathy, and then we start losing it. And the more we get disappointed in life, the less empathy we have with ourselves and with others. And empathy can really be learned as a skill. And I think environments where there's high empathy, some of the other things just naturally fall in place. And then the third skill there is around self-awareness. I really believe that in environments where there's an unhealthy culture, if you start developing the people, and if you do personal development of the people, and you up their skills, even if leadership doesn't come along the journey, you can do a lot for that team by teaching them self-awareness and by developing the individuals that make up that team. And ultimately, you have the opportunity to create a new culture in smaller teams. Then if we look at the habits that I believe is essential for creating a magnificent culture within a team or within a big organization, it's really around connecting. How often do people really connect with each other? Communication, how often do they communicate? What do they communicate? Is that communication just very professional, or do they communicate on a much more personal level? Coaching is an element of that communication, where people can have these coaching conversations with each other, either peer-to-peer or, leadership with their team. Gratitude is another habit that I think is totally underrated. You know, the acknowledgement that people feel when someone expresses gratitude to them. And again, this is not just the manager's job. In a team that functions really well, that peer-to-peer acknowledgement and gratitude really plays a big role in building up that team, in getting that team to be a high-performance team. Celebration, I think, goes hand in hand with acknowledgement. We often have post-mortems when a project has failed, but it's sometimes rare that we celebrate when we've succeeded or when we've overcome failures. And then I've added here acceptance, and I think, you know, practicing acceptance of the context of in which your employees function. What I loved about my time at Zappos was just seeing how friendly they are to dog lovers and how they create an environment at work that if you have a dog and the dog is your family, you can bring that dog to work, and there's a play area for the dog, and there's special dog houses that are air conditioned, and I just found that to be so accepting of people's context. Very often you don't just have an employee that functions in isolation. Very often that family becomes a part of your company construct. And I definitely know that, you know, in my company, I, as a leader, don't pay nearly as much attention to the extended family members. And I'd like to do more of that. Then expectations contracting. In my learnings with Zappos and Ritz-Carlton, what they're very clear about is what's the job to be done. And not necessarily prescribing how you do it, but being very clear about what the ideal outcomes are and what the non-ideal outcomes are. And I think very often we function with this grey. We leave too much open to interpretation in terms of what's the end goal. And I think, again, starting with the purpose, if the purpose and the vision is clear, the expectations are clear, then people know where they're heading. You know, they might take a windy road to get there, but they know where they're going. Then courage. I think, again, courage, you know, is misperceived as bravery, and courage is a lot more than just bravery. Courage is, you know, acting with your heart and being true to yourself and showing up, being yourself. And I think very often we see in environments where there's a lot of fear that people don't show up as themselves. They live up to what they think someone's expectation is of them, and often they fail. And then they maintain a story that they're not good enough. So I think really encouraging people to show up as they are, and also helping them with developing themselves so they show more courage, and almost practicing courage as a habit throughout the company. And then the last thing there around habits is authenticity. Creating habits where people can be themselves, creating habits so that people feel safe, that they can show up who they are, where they are. One of the habits that we do a lot in Brand Love is emotions check-ins, where we would start a meeting by saying, where are you now? How are you feeling right now? And just doing a temperature check of where people are. If I check in and say, you know, I'm angry, I don't have to go into lengthy explanations what I'm angry about, but then people know something triggered me, and that might come through in the way I communicate in that meeting. And sometimes I do explain why I'm angry, why I'm feeling angry. And that makes so much more sense. If someone says they're sad, then everybody knows where they are. Usually we'll ask, you know, what do you need right now? How can we support you in this? But it's important to show up as we are. Otherwise, we show up and we try and live up to other people's expectations, but it kind of bleeds through in the way we communicate and the things we do. All right, so I really do think that these three for me are the secrets of a great culture. Having purpose and articulating that purpose and making sure that that purpose is completely understood. Getting people to care about the purpose and care about each other really strengthens the fiber of your organization. And that really makes people own yes, the products and the things we sell, but it also makes them own the culture of the organization. And that's really when culture functions well, is when it's not owned by the executives, when everybody in the culture, in the company, wants to defend the culture. And that's really something that I saw at Zappos. You know, when someone's not living up to that culture, anyone feels free to bring that person back and say, hey, what's up? What's going on here? You know, I feel that you might be struggling with this piece. And then the third thing in terms of the secrets is the tools. Having the tools, not only the tools to do your job, but the tools to be able to communicate with each other, and having in that toolkit the skills that we need to show up authentically, to care, to practice, you know, our habits around communicating regularly, doing quality communication, doing those check-ins. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today around, you know, some of the ingredients, and then some of the secrets in terms of those building blocks that you need to have in place. I love this concept of brand aura, and this is something that I've borrowed from Zappos. I can't steal it because I can't take it away from them, but they use this term brand aura. And I had a look at what aura means, and aura is the distinctive atmosphere or quality that seems to be surround and be generated by a person, and in this case a company. So aura for me is the atmosphere or the quality that your brand emanates, and through designing it well, you can create something that people resonate with, and you can create something that attracts the right people. And it almost becomes this essence to your organization that really helps you when you design your employee journeys, when you design your customer journeys. You want to take this essence of your culture and weave it into that, so that when I strip off your brand, when I take your logo off your products and off your website, people distinctively know that it's you, and this essence or this aura is just felt. So it has been such a pleasure to spend this time with you and to share with you my feelings and my conviction about culture. I'm also going to leave you with a brand culture manifesto that you can download, and that you can use to start making notes of, you know, what's important in your organization. And I'll take you through that in a moment. So this is the culture manifesto that I'm going to give you as a download, and I want to quickly just talk you through these aspects to also help you just in your thinking as you go through this. So you want to start with populating what is your company's understood values. So what are your values? What are your goals? And this is where you connect kind of your culture and your strategy. So what is your strategic goals? What do you want to achieve inside your company? Then, you know, what are your ethics? And this is like, what are the non-negotiables when you make decisions? So what are your non-negotiables? Then, you know, what are the behaviors you want inside your organization? So what are the behaviors you want to encourage? And this is not to ignore the behaviors that you don't want, but very often, you know, we have this judgment around good and bad. But you know, we don't want to sound like that critical parent that's punitive. So what are the behaviors that you really want to encourage? And then what are the type of people? What's their conviction to be attracted to your brand? What do they want to do in this world? And that'll really help you understand, you know, what are the people that you want to attract to your brand. And then the last component here is around your practices and your rituals. And here what you're trying to do is create practices and rituals that reinforces people's conviction, that really helps them with behavior and reinforces the right kind of behavior, that creates constant discussion about the ethics, and that reinforces them on the company goals and living the values. And through these practices and rituals, this is where your culture comes alive. And it's really great if you, from a leadership perspective, you let the people contribute to the design of this, but then you need to model it and you need to lead in these behaviors. So you will get this culture manifesto as a download, and I really encourage you to take what you know about your own brand and start populating this, and maybe this will help you in some of the discussions that you need to have with your team. It's been such a pleasure to have this discussion with you. And you know where to find me, Chantal at brandlove.co.za. And I hope that I've in some way empowered you to lead the discussion around upgrading your culture for the future.